Hello and welcome back to the Nine Sports Podcast Hockey Edition. I'm your host, Maya Smith. My background is very different today. It has been a day of trying to find somewhere to record this podcast, so excuse the lighting and everything, but I'm so excited to be back this week. Hilary Knight simply has not been sleeping, and the PWHL is back, and we've got some teams that are finally finding their strides. Plus, what is an Olympic hangover and how is it hitting the league? This week, we have Melissa Burgess making her Nine Sports pod debut. She is the Toronto Sceptres beat writer here at the Ice Garden, and she does a ton of stuff behind the scenes to help the site run. She also writes her own PWHL and women's hockey content over on A Fresh Sheet on Substack. And honestly, if you follow women's hockey and you don't know who Melissa is, then you're missing out. So you're welcome. Now you're in the know. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Maya.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really excited to be on this. Honestly, I've wanted to for some time, but I just kind of didn't know how to step in and slide in. But I think this is the perfect time, right?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like this is the perfect week to have you on because Toronto is like a magical team now post Olympic break. So we're definitely going to dive into that. And I'm very excited to hear all of your wisdom on what the heck is happening there. But let's get started with the number one at the nine, which is the biggest headline of the week. So the number one at the nine, the PWHL was on SNL. Megan Keller and Hilary Knight joined Connor Story from Heated Rivalry on the stage on SNL this past Saturday. Earlier in the week, rumors were swirling that the Hughes brothers would be on SNL to continue their post-Olympic press tour. Whatever that might look like. Fans were hoping that Hilary Knight or another U.S. women's hockey star would join them on stage. And they did. Hilary Knight and Megan Keller came out on stage for Connor Story's monologue, decked out in their USA jerseys. And this actually makes Hilary Knight the first female pro athlete to be on SNL twice. Later that night, they joined the closing monologue in their PWHL jerseys. And after the show, they gifted Connor Story and Hudson Williams with custom PWHL jerseys, which is so cool. The Ice Garden's Lydia Murray caught up with Megan Keller after the show, and Megan Keller said, "We were wearing our USA jerseys in the monologue, and then what more perfect time to throw on the P-Dub jersey. Hopefully a lot of people watching that are wondering now what the P-Dub is, and maybe we got some new fans." What did you think of this whole SNL situation?
I thought it was really neat. Honestly, through the whole experience or the whole situation that's come about since after the Olympics, I know a lot of it has been focused on the U.S. men's team and what happened in the locker room after the game and the political statements and all that. And I recognize that it's definitely important to talk about those things and address them. But at some point, it's also like, okay, but let's recognize the women. Let's stop bringing the men
Absolutely.
to every conversation and making every conversation about the men because the women won gold. Like, that's a big
Mm-hmm.
deal regardless of anything else that's happened. That is a big deal. So I think it's super cool. I love the SNL opportunity, and I think Hilary Knight just makes perfect sense to be on there again because she absolutely crushed it last time, and I think she crushed it this time. Um, do I wish that the male hockey players maybe were not on there? Maybe, but I actually think it was kind of fun because the women kind of got to have their say, right? And I like that it was Megan Keller as well because she is obviously the biggest defender on that team and probably the most well known at this point. And they also used to be teammates, right? So they're already good friends away from the national team too. So I thought it was really neat.
Yeah, it was a great PWHL Boston reunion. I agree with everything that you said. I really, I was a little bit worried. I think there were a lot of people who were worried that it was going to be like on Connor Story and Hilary Knight and Megan Keller to kind of like clean up the mess that the men made. And I don't really think that they like centered them in that mess very much that night. So I agree with you. I think it's great. I think we've seen, and the PWHL kind of expected that this was going to be a thing. Insane growth numbers post-Olympics, which is fantastic. Seattle set the U.S. pro women's attendance record again after, I think it's like the third one this season that's been set and broken. And it looks like the Sirens might have a sellout this week, which that alone is amazing. They've had some difficulty with attendance. It's just so exciting to see that this did work to get the fans, some new fans into the league.
Yeah, I think Keller and Knight wearing their PW jerseys at the end there was just like the cherry on top, because if you notice, the Hughes brothers were not wearing their NHL jerseys. They were just in like regular attire. So I really love giving that extra shout out to the PW and then giving, custom jerseys to Connor Story and Hudson Williams. I think that just brings out that fandom even more, like, because obviously Heated Rivalry has produced this fandom and a lot of those people are kind of getting into hockey, but how many of them even know that women's hockey is a thing and that it's this accepting and welcoming community? So maybe there's an attraction there, and it's a natural fit, right? But people may not have known about it otherwise.
Absolutely. I will say I do think Hudson Williams should have a Vancouver Golden Eyes jersey. He's from Vancouver,
Yes.
but I understand the situation. But yeah, I agree. I think I saw a stat that the NHL has not seen a growth in viewership post Olympics, and I think exactly what you just highlighted there. Like, that was a really smart move by the PWHL to remind people that these players are playing all year long. This is where you can find them. And also a cool thing that I learned is that it's a Canadian company that does all of that, like custom jersey customization for the PWHL, and they were involved in that. So that's kind of cool. A little Canadian in with the American success. But yeah, I think overall that whole situation worked out great, considering it. I know there was a lot of trepidation when it sounded like the Hughes brothers were going to be there. And yeah, so very exciting. And hopefully, I think they also were on another news show this week too. At least Hilary Knight was. So hopefully this like post-Olympic press is bringing them some good viewership, and hopefully some, the other things like jersey sales and stuff like that that benefit the players. So
yeah, Hilary was on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Kimmel,
yes.
And then she was also on a show on CBS, which was where she revealed her injury during the Olympics that I know we'll talk about later. So she's definitely been making the rounds, which is great for her. And I even talked to, I had an interview earlier this week with Caroline Harvey, and just talking about the growth of women's sports in general and how this really is the best time for women's sports and for women's hockey in the US especially, just with that post-Olympics attention.
Absolutely. And it's the NCAA playoffs right now too, so hopefully we'll see some of that viewership and attendance carry over to them. We will have an episode on that in a couple of weeks. That is a huge blind spot for me, so I'm not even going to attempt to talk about it, but just know there's a lot of coverage of that going on the Ice Garden, and we will talk about it with people who actually understand the U.S. college system, because that's not me. But yeah, it's great. I mean, it's unfortunate that she's injured, and we will talk about that, but it's a great way to kind of like get her to stay out there, even though she's not on the ice right now. So that's awesome. Also great that they made the fleet made time and an opportunity for a meet and greet with Megan Keller and the Olympians, so that current fans can also enjoy some of that success and that kind of special moment with their players. So yeah, it's been great. Okay, let's talk about this season. So we've been back. The PWHL has been back for almost a week at this point. And some teams have benefited from the break and others maybe not, which we see often, even with the shorter international breaks. The Sceptres and the Victoire have been both off to really hot starts. Toronto's won 2 of the 3 games they've played since the break, including 2 on the road, and only just lost in a shootout to Montreal last night. And Montreal's won all 3 since the break, and they've jumped up into first place as well. So you are the Toronto Sceptres beat reporter here. I talked to Troy Ryan a little bit in the post-game press conference after the Sceptres beat the Golden Eyes earlier this week, but I'm really interested to know kind of from you, first of all, did you expect that this turnaround was coming?
I think so. We got to talk to some of the Olympians after they returned from Milan, but before the season started back up. And it was clear that they really wanted to go into the rest of the season with a playoff mentality. Every game counts, every game matters, and every point is critical. And especially for where the Sceptres were heading into, the break toward the bottom of the league, really not on a good note. They know what they have to do. That was the continuing stress was, we know what we need to do. We know what situation we're in, and we know what it's going to take to get up into a playoff spot. So I think that they've really turned that mentality around, and you've seen that in the last few games. They're not taking anything for granted. They're jumping on every opportunity, and they've already gone up, I think, 2 spots in the standings. But by the time we say this, by the time this airs, I'm not sure, because there are, games tonight that could affect the standings, but they're on their way up, and this is definitely the boost that they needed.
Yeah, when they were in town right before the Olympic break, uh, the Golden Eyes beat them 5-0, and the vibe coming off of Troy Ryan, and I think might have been Callie Flanagan, who was the only player that they sent for the post game press conference. The vibes were bad. The energy was bad. They were like, we don't know what we can't score. We can't do this. We make all these mistakes. Like, I don't know what we're doing. We've like dug ourselves into this hole. And when I asked Troy Ryan about it in Vancouver on the weekend, he said he felt that game they played against the Golden Eyes, where they lost 5-0, was kind of an anomaly in their season. But he was very impressed by the way the team played on Sunday, winning 2-1, fixing a lot of those mistakes. And yeah, just the vibe that was coming off of him and the other 2 players in the press conference, it was just like completely different.
I think it really, like, the Olympic break for any team could really go one way or the other, right? It could provide a really necessary break, let them kind of evaluate where they've been, and just give a reset or clean start for the second half. Or they could be on a good run, which obviously Toronto was not, and that could be an interruption. And then it's like, you wish you didn't have that break so that it didn't interrupt your kind of flow. And so I think in this case, Toronto really benefited. And one of the other things that I think that stood out for me, was how some of the players talked about kind of how the beginning of the season was a little tentative because of the Olympics, because
Mm-hmm.
like the Olympics are a huge opportunity, and you love playing in the PWHL, but you also don't want to risk getting hurt and then not being able to play in the Olympics.
Totally.
And so now that's in the background, they can kind of relax and just play their game and not have to worry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe they did send the most players from any team to the Olympics. Did you hear anything from the players who didn't go to the Olympics about some stuff they worked on over the break, or kind of how they were anticipating kind of meshing back together when everybody, including their head coach, returned from Milan?
So I haven't actually had a chance to talk to any of the non-Olympic players since the break, but when I talked to Troy Ryan before the break, and I kind of asked him, like, you've got a big chunk of your team going to the Olympics, a bunch of your coaching and performance staff, like, what's the plan for the team, for the people that are sticking around? And it was basically, they had some mandated time off. I guess each PWHL team has a mandated period off during the season. Theirs just happened to fall during the break.
Great.
So there was that time, but then it was really about getting together as a team for who was around, continuing practicing, putting your nose to the grind and just getting it done. And it sounds like, from what I've seen from other reports, that like Reagan Kirk really focused on doing that and resetting, and it's obviously paying off in dividends for her.
Absolutely. I like think she was a great goaltender before the break, but the performance that we've seen from her after the break has been just fantastic. She's a young goaltender, and I feel like she has just like fully risen to the occasion, and is like really one of the reasons that they've been able to get 2 wins in their last 3 games.
Yeah, I mean, anyone knows there are a lot of sharpshooters in the PWHL. I would not want to be a goalie in the PWHL, because no matter what team you're facing, there's a solid roster of like players that are going to shoot hard, shoot often, and that are known to score. But I think she's done a really good job of stepping up and helping to keep them in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you think that you've really seen a difference in their play since the break?
I think it's just that lack of hesitancy, like not second guessing everything, just kind of feeling free to make the moves and take those opportunities and take the chances. And I think if they continue that, they'll keep rising up the standings, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. It's they're looking like that team in the first year of the PWHL where they went on that run and they got like 11 straight wins, dug themselves out of the basement and finished first in the league. Like they're definitely looking like a very dangerous team.
Yeah.
Teams that maybe didn't have a great first couple games after the break, although some teams are still only in their like first game after the break, so we have to cut them a little bit of slack there. But Seattle and Vancouver both lost their first games after the break, as did Minnesota. Um, as somebody who covers the Golden Eyes, I am the most concerned for them, I think, after of the three teams, because they don't really win on the road so far this year, and they really need to win during this homestand that they're going into. So to not get that first win after the break is a little bit concerning. But as Coach Brian Adelsky said in the post game, like it's hard to play a team that has already played a game coming back from the Olympic break when it's your first game back, because they like most of these players haven't played a competitive game of hockey since like the end of January. So maybe not too much weight to put into there. Seattle also not a great start, but they have some key injuries, which we'll talk about here in a second. But obviously, Hilary Knight announced that she's injured, and so she hasn't played yet. They do play tonight, Wednesday night when we're recording this, so could be completely different when you're listening to this on Thursday. But interestingly, I think Minnesota, I feel like they usually have a bit of a difficulty coming back after a break. I remember making a meme in the first season about how they were like the only team that hadn't won a game since the break. So they suffered a 4-0 loss to the Victoire, and this is actually the first game all season where they haven't scored, which that stat kind of blew my mind. But what do you think about these teams who kind of had a slow start coming back?
I think we mentioned Hilary Knight, but we also need to mention, just to be fair, Kendall Coyne Schofield is also missing from Minnesota.
True.
And that is a big piece, just having your captain out in general, but she's a good offensive piece for them. But I think it's finding that energy and figuring it out, like bringing the team back together and finding a new identity in the second half. Like what kind of team are you going to be in this second half of the season? There's still so much hockey to be played, which it feels like there's already been so much hockey. And then there was this break, and it's just like it's totally thrown me off because I'm like, oh yeah, it really is half the season still.
Yeah.
And so realizing like some of these teams could end up with like 70 points. It's like, what? That's insane. So I think it's just really that reset that we talked about earlier and figuring out what is your focus going to be in the second half and taking it one game at a time.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't let that 4-0 loss be the reason that you don't make the playoffs this year after you've had a fantastic first half of the season. And I think similarly, like when it's your first game back, you haven't played as a team for however long. People were at the Olympics, people were traveling, like it just takes a little bit of time to come back together. Let's talk about injuries. Let's like continue off of that, because I I think this is something that people talk about a lot when it comes to the men's tournament. The men haven't gone to the Olympics for 12 years for a variety of reasons, but one of those is there's an injury risk for sure when you send players to another tournament. And now after the Olympics, for the women, we've seen Poulin, Ambrose, Knight, Coyne Schofield, Thompson. They've all missed games due to Olympic injuries. And then Daryl Watts also missed time with an illness. We don't know if that's Olympics related or not, but there's obviously fatigue that's involved. Do you think that there's a conversation to be had, or that may be had, about is it still important for these players to go to the Olympics? We've talked about the viewership. I don't think that the answer is yes, it's a bad thing for them to do, but do you think there's a need for a discussion there?
I don't I don't know. I think it's tough because my question is, if it is a discussion, who else is going to the Olympics?
Very
Like
true. Mhm.
There's not an AHL style league for the women. There's not like that developmental league. So then you're going to college players, which obviously there's college players that are of Olympic caliber, but not all of them are. And then there's also like college seasons happening. So then you're losing
Exactly.
a bunch of good players during the college season. And then what do you go beyond that? The U18s? Well, we already have a U18 tournament. So it just wouldn't be the same level
Mhm.
of Olympic hockey. And I think it's important to still have the Olympics because even though we have this league that is, a constant league, the Olympics are just a different level. I think it
Very
was
true.
Hilary Knight that spoke about it at oh gosh, it was the rivalry series in November when it was here in Buffalo. And, I kind of asked her about the rivalry series and if she felt that that was still necessary given the PWHL. And I think that her answer is really what comes to mind right now. And I think it applies to the Olympics too, is that that really is like the best of the best against the best.
Mhm.
So even though the PWHL is supposed to be like the best versus the best, that Olympics or the rivalry series or whatever the international competition is, worlds, just brings it to a different level. And it really just carves out who is above the line. And it's the best hockey you're going to see. And it brings so many eyes to the sport above everything else.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and that's a really good point about kind of the pool. There really isn't that many options to draw from. I haven't had a chance to talk to the Vancouver, Golden Knights Olympians because I wasn't in Vancouver when they had their, interviews, but I think that most of the players, even the ones that were injured, would not trade that experience for the world. Like, even if they, like, have to miss games, like, this is such an important thing for them to experience. I think they would happily put themselves on the line every single time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even just like putting aside the actual hockey playing experience, just the entire other experience of traveling to another country, representing your country, meeting all these athletes from different sports, and then within your sport from different countries, like, players who are in the SDHL and other pro leagues in Europe and things like that, that you wouldn't normally interact with. Getting to go to the closing ceremonies or the opening ceremonies or whatever like, that is an experience that they will never forget. And I think, we have players like Hilary Knight who have been in the Olympics multiple times, but for some of them, that may be their only Olympic experience. And I
Mhm.
think the thing is, you never know if it's going to be your only experience because nothing is ever guaranteed, especially 4 years from now. So I think it's a really important experience for them personally and professionally. And I would be hard pressed to see anyone take it away from them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree, and I think as we said earlier too, it benefits the PWHL a lot and leagues in the past. Like, there's been a lot of, "Oh, this is the first time players have had somewhere to play." That's not true, but
Right.
it's the first time they've had this stage and this, like, caliber, but yeah, I think it's done wonders for the viewership, and it just has, like, been kind of that entry point for a lot of people to bring them into the league. So definitely valuable for the players to be there. Along similar lines, Troy Ryan was asked about the post Olympic impact on players in the post game press conference on Sunday in Vancouver. And I want to play a little clip from his interview because I think he had something really interesting to say here.
As far as the coming back can be very difficult, and it's not that no one wants to be back. They all want to be back, but um, there's an emotional kind of shift you have to make. You're obviously fatigued. You've been all in on trying to win a gold medal, and there's just a little bit of a lull when either a celebration when you're successful and a bit of a downer when you're not successful. So I don't think it's just a hockey thing. If you kind of look back at the years of the Olympics, a lot of athletes tend to have I think it's been documented. It's called an Olympic hangover, and it's usually often will last like a month. And I think the one thing we tried to do here is not try to just push it under the rug and just say we got to shift right back to Sceptres hockey. It's letting everybody deal with it a little bit differently and handle it differently. Everybody's got different ways to transition into a new situation, and you got to just kind of help them with that and support them as much as you can.
So I think that's really interesting. I did some research into that concept, and a sports psychologist with the U.S. Olympic Committee said that you work so hard as an athlete at the Olympics, you put everything into it, and for some athletes, their performance is over in a matter of seconds, and then you're done. Now what? And how do you come back? There's the fatigue piece, the travel piece, all of that, but there's also the mental and emotional piece. And for a lot of, especially for teams like the Golden Knights, for example, pretty much everybody who went to the Olympics did not take off that box that they wanted to take off. They didn't send any Americans, so they have 5, I believe, Canadians who took home a silver medal, and then they also have a couple of teams and players that didn't medal. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, because I definitely can see there's been a little bit of a slump from some of those players. How have you kind of seen that so far?
Yeah, I think going back to that post-Olympic press conference that we had with the Sceptres, you can see it on their faces. Like, they are not happy. Like, yes, this was a great experience. Yes, they'll tell you all about the pasta that they ate and the chocolate and the dining hall food and the closing ceremonies and how cool that was. But you can tell they're not satisfied. Because while some of us, like me as a normal person, thinks like getting a silver medal is nothing to turn your nose at, for them, obviously that was not the goal. And to not medal if you're another team, or not even get to that stage, like, that's not the goal. So it is disappointing, especially because for some of them, they've been working toward that for 4 years, really, if you think about it. And if you work on a project for 4 years and then ultimately you don't reach your goal, that is going to crush you just mentally and emotionally. It's going to be a weight on you for a long time, especially considering you don't have another opportunity to do that right away. Like, you might get another chance at it in 4 years, but we don't know. And now, meanwhile, you're back home, you're dealing with the travel, you're dealing with the fatigue, the physical aspects of it, but you've got to go back to playing hockey like normal too and focus on your day job and your regular job. So I definitely think that that's a real thing. I think also because the PWHL is more hockey than some of these players were maybe used to in the past. There's more games on a more regular basis. I think it's just taking time to get used to that kind of thing. Because of course the Olympics were a lot of hockey in a short amount of time. So trying to recover from that, but then ultimately jump right back into it, it's tough.
Absolutely. And for a lot of the players, it's remembering the systems that they played a month ago as well, because, Troy Ryan has a very different coaching style than Brian Idelski or than Greg Fargo or like any of those people, right? So it's like, how do I remember the chemistry that I had with these players before I played against them in the Olympics? Or the ice surface is different size. How do I remember like what I'm supposed to do in these situations? So I really appreciated Troy's perspective on and like acknowledgement of that, and kind of like saying that they are prepared for it. I would be intrigued to know if other teams kind of had that same insight, depending on how many times their organization has experienced that like kind of Olympic high. Like with Troy and Gina, they've experienced that a few times. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they all kind of settle back in to the rest of the season.
Yeah, and like for the Sceptres specifically, not to get into the Hockey Canada stuff too much, but it seems like this is it for Troy Ryan. We don't know about Gina Kingsbury. Her contract is also up. And how I mean, I don't think that changes the Toronto Sceptres, but it does change the dynamic, right? Like, because they're used to working together with Hockey Canada, they're used to working with a bunch of players on their team with Hockey Canada, and then all of a sudden that's not going to be the case anymore, and it's going to be different. It'll be interesting to see what happens next season with all of that.
Yeah, a lot of question marks too, whether it impacts them now or in 4 years. It's still, the media is talking about it. I'm sure they're fielding some questions about it and stuff like that. So it's going to be in their back of their minds, regardless of an immediate decision or not, for sure. So one of the segments we do on this show is top shelf predictions. Last week, Alyssa predicted that the Seattle Torrent would go on a bit of a streak. That's obviously not what's happened, as they've lost their first game. They could win tonight, but we won't know. They have had like a good, I don't know, media streak. Like they've had some really awesome things happen to the team, just not so much on the ice. I'm curious what your prediction is for the next week.
So I'm going to say that the Toronto Sceptres are going to be in a playoff spot at the end of next week.
Ooh, that's exciting.
I really like
it.
what we've seen from them since the Olympic break. Like you said, they've won twice. They just missed winning against Montreal. Like it was like, I think a 6-round shootout. Like they took it the length. They're showing that they're capable of it, and they're kind of capitalizing on the faults of the other teams, and we'll see what happens. But I think that they could be in a playoff spot next week.
Absolutely. And I think even if just going back to what we were talking about, if those players that were all at the Olympics, if they're still dealing with that Olympic hangover and the team is also being this successful, their like next level could be even crazier. So
Right.
That's a great prediction. Is there anything else you want to say about the Olympics, the Sceptres, or anything before we wrap up?
I think just the injuries, the situation with all the injuries, it sucks. But I don't think that it's a surprise to anyone, right? Like, I think that maybe they weren't talking about it externally, but I think the teams and the players all kind of knew that there were these chances that things happen at the Olympics. You're playing really hard. You're playing your best hockey. You're playing a lot of hockey in a short period of time. And as much as you want to be healthy for your PWHL team, you're going to lay it all on the line during the Olympics. You're going to give it all. And if that means coming back and being on LTIR for a little bit, well, sorry, but I think, Hilary Knight will be comforted by her gold medal. And I think that she'll be okay. And obviously, honestly, I hope they're all good. Hopefully, Knight's able to come back, Coyne Schofield, Ambrose, everybody else. Poulin is dealing with an injury. She missed the first game back after the Olympics, but she did play since then. But I just hopefully everybody gets healthier as the season goes on. Still lots of hockey left, like we said. So definitely love the Olympics, love the post-Olympic surge. And now we'll see what the second half brings.
Exactly. Super exciting. And they're also playing in a fantastic league where not having Hilary Knight will not ruin your entire playoff push. There are so many other fantastic players on the Torrent who can step up, and it's just a great opportunity for these other players to make their mark as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the Torrent presumably were practicing without Knight during the entire Olympic break. So while maybe they're not used to playing games without her, it's not unprecedented, and they do have those other players who can step up.
Definitely. It's going to be an exciting rest of the season. So make sure that you stay tuned to the Ice Garden and the 9 Sports. We actually just redid the entire website to make it like a full-on newsroom. Everything you need to know about women's sports is there. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow and all those things on this show and also on our Women's Sports Daily show, which I'm also recording after this. So you'll hear my voice on both shows today. And I'll leave all of your information down below, Melissa, but where can they find you?
So you can find me, unfortunately, still on X, aka Twitter. I will always call it Twitter. As much as I try to leave that platform, there's just too much going on and it's really hard to leave it. So I'm at _ Melissa Burgess over there. You can also find me on Substack, as Maya mentioned, at A Fresh Sheet, where I publish pretty much weekly PWHL roundups and whatever else I'm kind of thinking that doesn't fall under the Ice Garden purview. And then obviously I'm still at the Ice Garden and ready to cover the rest of the season and more.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm still over there on Twitter someday, but it really is like the place where sports is still, so we can't leave
like yet. I've tried some of the alternatives, but there just isn't that same community and that same population yet. So unless like a mass of people goes over, it's really hard to replicate what Twitter has right now. So
it is.
We're still crushing it.
We're nice on there, so we're worth the follow, and we don't say horrible things. So
Of course.
Yeah, so thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for having me.